So you put in all this time learning a new scale shape, and what can you do with it? I mean, as guitar players, we fall into this trap so much. I learned a scale shape, and that's all I can do with it. So how do you get to where you can use a scale shape like the major scale shape that we're going to talk about in this video to actually play some music and start soloing? As guitar players, we tend to focus on technique and scale shapes a lot, and then we get trapped into this world of playing through scale shapes. All the way up and down the fretboard, and you can know all the scale shapes in the world, but if you can't make music with it, what good is it? So I just have a couple tips for you that I want to share with you that have helped me over the years, that I still work on all the time to get to where you can make music, in particular with the major scale in this video. I'm going to be doing some loops here, and I'll have some jam tracks for you that kind of relate to these loops, just to help you get some practical experience doing this. And the first tip that I have for you is to simplify things a lot. And by that, I mean really limit what your options are as far as using, in this case, a major scale. Because when you have something like this, that's a lot of stinking notes, man. And if you have a chord progression that's going by, there's no way you can keep up with it if you're just starting out, right? So what I would recommend doing is just picking two strings, any two strings, and playing a G major scale. Just those two strings, and concentrate on creating a really cool melody line with it, and just being really intentional about having what notes you're choosing out of that scale sound really good. And for this, the shape I would recommend doing, if you don't know this major scale shape, 6-string root note, first finger starting. It starts off with this shape. Just on those two strings, so you're skipping a fret in between each finger. So 3, 5, 7, the next string 3, 5, 7. But what we're gonna do is take that, and by the way, your root note is right here, this G root note, lowest note that you're playing there on the 3rd fret of the low E. We're gonna take that and we're gonna move it up a little higher, so it's a little bit easier to create a melody with over some chords. So what we're gonna do is find a G on the B string, which is right here, on the 8th fret, and play that same shape. So skip a fret in between each one, so what was that, 8, 10, 12, and then 8, 10, 12 on the string higher than that too. So that is your pattern. If you need to take some time and get that down, that's totally fine. If you already know it, that's great. And if you want to move it to, you know, any other two strings that use a G major scale shape, it can be this. It can be this. It doesn't really matter as long as you're limiting yourself and your options to just two strings. And the idea here is going to be, we'll go in this order. We'll do a really simple line over a chord progression, and then we'll do a little bit of improvisation over a chord progression using just these 6 notes. And if you get lost, just go back to your root note, because that's probably going to sound very good over the chords that we're using. And speaking of the chords that we're using, one way to get the most out of the scales that you learn is to realize that the whole reason for a scale, the first thing that you have to look at is the chord progression you're playing over to know what scale will fit with that. And for this video, we're going to stick with just some diatonic chords in the key of G, or chords that occur naturally in the key of G. So the G major scale will cover them all. You don't have to think about anything else but making the notes that you choose out of this scale sound good. What we'll do, if you don't know a G major scale, spelled G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and Josh will put a graphic here on the screen that says the chords in the key of G major too. So the first chord would be a G major, second chord would be an A minor, third chord would be a B minor, fourth chord would be C major, fifth chord would be a D major, the sixth chord will be E minor, and the last chord, which we're not going to even worry about, is a F sharp diminished chord. But the chord progression I'm going to play, all the chords occur naturally in the key of G, so you can get away with using the G major scale over everything we're going to play here. And this is one thing that it does take a little brain work and a little bit of dedication to start learning about chord progressions and the way major keys work, to discern or to make a good choice about what scale to use or when you need to change scales. But for the major scale, let's say you're just grooving over a G. You can use a G major scale over that, obviously, but if all the chords fit in the key of G, you can use a G major scale over that too. So I'm going to program in a G, D major, E minor, C progression, like this, the ultimate pop progression, right? And we'll just play over that. Let me get that programmed in real quick in the looper. Okay. So go to your G on the B string and just start noodling. then try to come up with just one line and see how it sounds over each chord. And already that sounds, to me, that sounds way better than doing this. Something like that. So we just simplified things, brought it way down, created one little line, and as the chords go by, they make a simple phrase like that we played. I don't think it was something like that. It makes it sound interesting because the chords that are changing underneath it give it context, and it still sounds good no matter really no matter what note you hit, as long as you are a little wise about it. And so that's the first thing I would recommend doing. The second thing I would recommend doing for getting to know and use the major scale better is to just let your ear guide you and don't really worry about what exact notes you're hitting. So just put a progression like this on. I'll have this exact progression for you in a loop. It's 2 bars of G, 2 bars of D, 2 bars of E minor, 2 bars of C. And just let your ear guide you. Play whatever you want and see what notes you sound like. And this will really help develop your ear. So something like this. That note right there, just hit, I didn't like it, so I got off of it real quick. So keep doing that. So I started deviating a little bit from there just because I was letting my ear guide me. I wanted to hear the lower notes that were below that G note. So that's what I recommend doing. If you have a looper, put it on and just use those 2 strings. If you get bored with that, move to a different 2 strings in the G major scale, or you can move that pattern around, or you can use those 2 or the top 2 if you know the simple G major scale shape. The important thing is that you just try to make up good sounding melodies. So I'm going to use this whole scale shape right now and just see what happens. I'm not going to think about shapes. I'm just going to let my ear guide me and see what happens. Here you go. And toward the end there, you could hear that I got a little theme going, and it was a little bit more melodic, and it sounded way better than just running up and down the scale. So that's the second thing I would, as far as improvisation, that I would recommend. Now, if you've already been doing this kind of stuff and you're already pretty good at it, another thing that I would recommend doing is starting to work in some sequencing, some scale sequencing in with your playing. And I did a little bit of that, and probably one of the most common scale sequences that I like to use, because it breaks up the scale and gets you out of using things in a really linear or, that kind of thing, is just sequencing in thirds. So what we would do, the reason we call it thirds is just because you would start on a G note and then play a third away, or skip a note in this scale shape, so, and then play the second note of the scale and play a note that's a third away there. And the same thing, and we'll have a tab for this for you. It's a coordination that's a little bit tough to get down at first. But it really breaks you out of that cycle of just going up and down a scale. The next thing I would do after that, another one that's a little bit more advanced, is just working on playing through all the triad shapes in the scale. And this is one that's relatively new to me. I put off doing this a long time because I thought it was just too hard, kind of counted myself out. But all you would do is start on the G and play the notes in a G major chord. G, B, and D. And then you have start on your A next and play the notes in an A minor chord. And then B, C, D, E minor, and then find F sharp and you're back to G. But doing little exercises like that will get you out of the habit of going just up and down the scale, and it'll allow you to target notes a little bit better when you're playing through a progression like this. So I'm going to put this progression back on G, D, E minor, C. I'm just going to play triads over those and maybe try to mix in the scale a little bit. So something like this. So another super simple way to think about using the major scale, but it gets you out of this and starts making you think about the chords you're playing over more and gets you just a lot more really cool intervals and a sense of melody when you're playing with your G major scale. I know I have a lot more work to do with this kind of playing, especially when it comes to the major scale, because there's so much information there that is really hard to sift through at first when you're, especially if you're playing over chord changes. But something like these exercises, if you do them on a regular basis, then you're going to have a much easier time when somebody pulls up, when you have a jam that's in a diatonic progression in whatever key you're in. If you wanted to do this in A, you could do it in A. If you wanted to do it in D, you could do it in D. You just have to change the location of your major scale. But take a couple of these principles one at a time, start off very simple, and see if you don't get better at using the major scale. Don't forget to download the jam track for this one for practice. See you later.